Recovering from mistakes is surprisingly powerful. It's okay to make mistakes if we can recover from them and move on, get back on track. And part of the reason to take smaller steps is to make smaller mistakes.
Welcome to the LabVIEW Experiment. I am your host, Sam Taggart from SAS Workshops. In my 15 years of working with and training developers, I've had the opportunity to conduct a lot of experiments. Over here, we believe in embracing failure as the essential learning experience that it is. And what better way to learn than from other people's mistakes? In this podcast, I talk to industry experts, colleagues, and friends about their failures and how they have turned them into future successes.
Hey listeners, just a reminder, this is part 2 of a 2-part series with JB and Sam. If you didn't catch part 1, you may want to go back and listen to that. You can just skip back a track on whatever listening platform you're on. Hope you enjoy.
Part of the reason to deliver sooner is to make smaller mistakes. Part of the reason to write tests first is to make smaller mistakes. Not just because they hurt less, but because we can recover from them sooner when we make them. And gradually we reach the point where the mistakes are so small that we don't even think of them as mistakes anymore. They're just experiments and outcomes. And when they're just experiments and outcomes, all that emotional baggage that comes from making yet another mistake today at work goes away. And we have a lot more energy to bring to the next task. We work with a lot less stress. We work with a lot less guilt and shame. And that makes it a lot easier for us to work without blame. Not just lead without blame, but program without blame. Well, we knew we were going to get this wrong. That's why we wrote the tests first. We knew we were going to misunderstand the customer. That's why we wrote scenarios. That's why we're delivering stuff every week instead of waiting to do it every month. We knew we were going to get this wrong, so that's why we put something in production as soon as possible. That's the whole point, is we know we're going to get this stuff wrong. Let's figure out how to be a little less wrong today than we were yesterday.
I had this exact experience actually just last night. So I work with this team in India and they wanted me to show them this new framework. And there's like an example program. I was like, okay, let's add a new module. So I created the new module. And the first thing I did was like, okay, let's launch it and let's shut it down and make sure that when the program launches and shuts down, it actually shuts down. And I screwed it up right away.
Yeah.
And I was like, because I did all the launching stuff and I just like spaced on doing the closing stuff. And like, I launched it, it shut down, and it didn't shut down. I was like, that's why you do the test.
Right.
And it was not planned at all. It just like spontaneously happened. I was like, oh crap.
One of the benefits of this, walking skeleton idea is not necessarily to build a small increment of the product, but it's not even necessarily to find those kinds of mistakes early when they're less expensive to fix. But there's actually a deeper benefit, and that is, have you ever been in a situation where you tried to do something you never done before, eventually it stopped working, you couldn't figure out why it stopped working, everywhere you looked, everything seemed to be right, and then 2 hours later, you found something really, really, really elementary, like the equivalent of there's a wire sticking out of the back that you never connected in the first place, and then you feel like an idiot, and you just wasted 3 hours getting to this point. That's the deeper reason to do things like the walking skeleton, to have these thin slices, to do the architectural spike where you try to connect the technology pieces together before you even think about trying to write any feature code. It's not just so that you can find those mistakes sooner, it's so that you can avoid that situation where something's broken and everything seems right and you can't figure it out. And you just keep getting angrier and angrier. And that just makes it harder and harder for you to think and harder for you to see what's right in front of you. When you try to use some framework you've never used before and you realize that you made a faulty assumption about the life cycle events from the very beginning. I want to discover that with a dumb example where I'm not trying to make a feature work, so that when it comes time to actually build the first feature, I can focus on the feature and not whether I understood the framework correctly, not whether I'm using the library correctly. That's, for me, the really good reason to do it, is not merely to get it right the first time. It's to avoid spending the day screaming at the walls, losing my mind, sinking into more and more mistakes, more and more mistakes, mistakes on top of mistakes, forgetting to set a timer, forgetting to get up and walk away, forgetting to take a break, saying, no, I'm going to stick with this until I get it to work, damn it, and nothing's going to stop me. I can't see how stupid I'm being in that moment. I can't see how reckless I'm being. I can't see how unproductive that is because I'm in it. I'm in it way too deep. These are the kinds of things that we can avoid by working in more incremental ways, by working more iteratively. It's not just a good idea that ships stuff sooner and avoids doing unnecessary steps so that we can save our customers another $27. I want to stop being angry at my job. And I mean at my job in both ways. I want to be less angry while at my job, and I want to be less angry with my job. Like, we don't need to live like this. By taking smaller steps, by thinking more about what we expect to happen before we start doing it, by even writing that stuff down, or maybe even in code, by setting a timer for 30 minutes and stopping when the timer yells, by slicing the work into smaller pieces, Mikado method, all these things. They're all about avoiding the situation where you're deep in the woods, it's on fire, and you have no idea how to get out, and all you can do is scream. That's no way to live. We can do better. And that's part of what I really want to do. You know, the work that I've been doing, especially with the JBrains Experience, where we just bring people together and they talk about what's going on, and we do some consulting and some mentoring and some coaching and some simple question and answers. Like, the whole point of that is to help. I'm not just there to teach refactoring techniques or how to split stories into smaller pieces. I mean, eventually all the discussions become about, you know, I keep trying to do the right thing and it's hard. Or I keep trying to remember to use this trick and I keep failing. Or I'm just so angry at how bad things are, and I want to make peace with it in a way that's going to help me move forward. These are the kinds of things that we end up talking about. And that's the kind of work that I really enjoy doing. It's not the kind of thing that makes for very good conference talks. The conference talks really do kind of need to be about the more concrete things. Like, here's why you need to work in smaller increments, and here's why refactoring is important. But ultimately, when you get a chance to talk to people and they tell you what's actually bothering them, it's a whole bunch of, I'm in a bad place and I don't know how to get myself out. I fell in a hole and I don't know how to climb out. I'm sick of falling into holes. Why can't I see the holes before I fall in? Or there are patterns they fall into, and they want help getting out this time and seeing the pattern so they can not fall into it next time. And that's the stuff that I really love to do. And that's what we've been trying to build over the last several years with the JBrains Experience, is a place where people can get that kind of help. And I can provide that kind of advice. I can be the person who can see the hole before you fall in, so that you can eventually learn to see the hole for yourself.
Yeah, that's really powerful. I've gotten quite a bit out of the JBrains Experience. So for those listening, it's kind of like a mastermind type experience, perhaps. Yeah, there's a Slack group and video meetings where we get together and talk about various things. And as you can tell from me talking to JB, he's part psychologist, although not really psychologist, but there is some psychology in there. And really, the best way I heard you explain it was, to your point of like just making peace with things. It's like you work in a company and there are only so many things you can change. And if you try to change the entire company, you're going to drive yourself nuts. So how do you figure out like what you can change and what's in your control, and how can you make
Right.
it livable for you? And, maybe that means staying there and making the whole, slowly transforming the company. Maybe that means I stay here till I grow enough till I go somewhere else, or whatever it means. But there's some way to make it better, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that the big thing for me in that whole question, because that is what most of our discussions are about, right? It's like, when is the right time to quit? How how do I influence people around me more effectively, or will they ever change? These kinds of questions, which really all kind of boil down to how much energy should I put into trying to make things better around me, and how much energy should I put into finding the next thing, and how much energy should I put into making peace with how things are. And that's a tricky thing to balance. Everybody's different. Everybody has different, part of what I can do, the sort of psychology part of what I can do is to help people connect with what do they have, what do they truly have energy for? What are they actually going to do, as opposed to the things they think they should do, but when the chips are down, that they're too afraid, or they're too tired, or they're too frustrated, or whatever it is. Um, and to really understand that making peace with something doesn't mean giving in. It doesn't mean giving up. Um, you know, I think this is going to sound kind of bigger than I mean it, but I think it's true. I think Western culture teaches us that you have to fight, and that accepting things the way they are means giving in and letting the other guy win. And I don't think that's true. I think you can learn to accept things as they are and still want to make them better. I think you can learn to truly accept things as they are and still try to improve them. That we're not merely tolerating people, we're really accepting, we're actually learning to love them as they are, faults and all, because we want them to love us the way we are, faults and all. And if everybody could do that, we could actually make some progress. That doesn't mean that everything is beautiful, nothing needs to change, and everything is fine the way it is. We're not trying to turn each other into the dog in the middle of the burning building. But at the same time, screaming at people doesn't seem to work either. So what's the middle way? And the middle way seems to be balancing these three things, right? How much energy do I put into changing things here around me? How much energy do I put into finding the next place? And how much energy do I put into changing myself? And that's really that's the core of the work that we do at the JBrains Experience. It's just sometimes it starts with people asking about how to refactor code, and people asking about how to write users scenarios, and people asking about, pretty soon those questions become, well, how do I get my coworkers to do TDD with me? Or how do I get my architect to stop trying to nail down every detail of the design before we get started? Or how do I get, what do I do with the fact that every time we ship a feature to the customer complains about 37 things? Like, that's how the discussion always starts. And when you poke and poke and poke and poke, before long, you get to how much time should I invest, how much energy should I invest in changing myself, changing the organization, and finding the next place? What's the right balance for me? And, I think that's what keeps people coming back. Like, that's a much more meaningful discussion, a discussion that has a bigger impact on our lives. And it's much more effective. It's not just about trying to find quick fixes to whatever crazy behavior is going on around us, but figuring out how to balance living in the world we're actually in with making the world a better place for ourselves and others. Trying to do too much of one or the other doesn't work. What's the balance? That's what we try to figure out together.
I think this conversation goes hand in hand with something you've been bringing up quite frequently recently, and maybe we can talk about is that when it comes to change and motivation, and people aren't motivated to change, and the three reasons, you want to talk about that? Because I found that pretty insightful.
Absolutely. Yes. So when I first became interested in these topics, of course, I, like a lot of people, thought I was knowledgeable and well-meaning, and if everybody just did it like me, damn it, then they'd be a lot happier. And I realized pretty soon that that doesn't work very well. That you make people feel bad, you make people look bad. That when you adopt that attitude, you effectively train people not to listen to you. You get a small, rabid group of fans who love you, and most everybody else wants nothing to do with you. Not really how I wanted to live. And then I ended up at a conference called Amplify Your Effectiveness, which is an annual conference that was run by Gerald Weinberg, he of Secrets of Consulting and Total Quality Management series, all that kind of stuff. He was a computer when computers were people. And he's sort of the consultant's consultant. That's what he was for us. In that conference, I met someone named Dale Emery who taught me something about how to understand people's motivation. Rule zero of motivation is not a transitive verb. You can't motivate people. You can only try to understand what motivates them and then decide what to do from there. So how do you understand what motivates people, or how do you understand when someone feels motivated? It turns out that there's a really simple model that gets you like 70% of the way there, and it gives you a really good starting point to dig deeper. We've all experienced a situation where somebody refuses to do something that is obviously a good idea. And the question becomes, why? Like, we know it's a good idea, even they know it's a good idea, and they still refuse to do it. Why not? And typically, there are three places that you can look. Start with, do they know how to get started? If they get started and doing it, do they know what will happen? And if they can get started and know what will happen, do they want that to happen? And there's a good chance that one of those three things is missing, and maybe all three. Now, the junior manager's mistake, this is sort of one of those patterns that I've labeled the junior manager's mistake, is to assume that the problem is always number one. That the problem is always they don't know how to get started. So if I just get them training, then they'll know what to do and they'll do it. And I've been the beneficiary of junior manager mistakes a lot in my career. It's part of the reason why I did a whole bunch of TDD training courses. Because some relatively newly minted manager said, TDD is a good idea, my people won't do it. The problem is they don't know how. If we teach them how to do it, they'll do it. And I was willing to go along with that for a very long time. And as you can imagine, it went almost nowhere most of the time. Like a handful of people learned a bunch of really good stuff. The rest mostly didn't care, not much changed. And part of that was because they were ignoring two other aspects of motivation. Do they know what will happen when they start practicing TDD? If they don't, then there's a pretty good chance they won't try. If they know what will happen when they start practicing TDD and it seems like a bad idea and they're afraid of it, they don't want that to happen, then they'll sure as hell stop. And it took me until the first time that I worked in an organization where a testing manager confided in me that if the programmers learn TDD and get good at it, then their testers will be out of a job. So they actively sabotaged training attempts to learn test-driven development in the organization because effectively the programmers were going to steal the testers' jobs. Now, I tried very hard to let them know why that was probably not something they needed to worry about. But in the end, they saw that the programmers knew how to get started. They saw that what was going to happen if the programmers did it, and they didn't want it to happen, so they actively sabotaged it. We do that to ourselves. So if we can't bring ourselves to do something that we know is a good idea, those are three questions we can ask ourselves. Do I not know how to get started? Okay, well, maybe I need to read a book, or maybe I need to run a bunch of experiments 30 minutes at a time and make a bunch of mistakes and learn some stuff, and then maybe I'll be off and running. Sometimes it's like that. Or I know how to get started, but I'm not really sure what's going to happen. Like, I'm not sure that this will actually make the design better. It might make it worse. Or I might end up slowing down instead of going faster. Or I'm going to learn that there's a whole bunch of other stuff I don't know, and I'm going to confront something that's painful. So if I don't know, then I'm just not going to start. Or I do know that I'm going to end up confronting a bunch of stuff that's going to be painful, and I do not want that pain. As much as it would be nice to do this thing, I'm worried about the can of worms it's going to open up. I can pretty clearly see that can of worms, and I'm not going to let it happen. So those are the three things we look for.
The interesting thing that's popping out of me is it's not necessarily what objectively will happen if they do it, but what they think will happen if they do it.
And that's the whole point. I used to say, do they know what will happen? And instead, I prefer to frame it more like, can they foresee what will happen? Because that allows the possibility that they're like delusional. They might be. They might be seeing the wrong thing. Like part of the point of this model is to understand what it's like in their head so that you can give them better advice, so that you can support them better. Like there's no point in giving people training if the problem is that they're pretty sure that this will cause them to be out of a job in 3 months, or they're pretty sure that that somebody's going to see that they're a fraud, or they're pretty sure that that this is going to take away the two parts of the job they actually know how to do and launch them into this wasteland of uncertainty. Like I would resist too. This whole model of motivation is part of a larger idea that Dale Emery wrote about that I learned from him, the idea of resistance as a resource. The idea that when you're trying to influence someone and they're resisting you, rather than seeing their resistance as a barrier to break down, look at their resistance as a resource of information, as a source of knowledge, as something to pay attention to and to honor. Not in the sense of, I accept your objections and will go away now, but more in the sense of, I'm going to take your objections seriously. I'm not going to pretend that you're the delusional one. Maybe I am. Maybe there's something really important about the situation that I'm missing. I'm going to use your resistance as clues about what might be going on, instead of just saying, oh, I'm going to meet resistance by banging on the wall until it breaks, which is what a lot of people, even well-meaning people, do when they try to influence others. And it turns out that when you use people's resistance as a resource, instead of breaking through, which sometimes happens, it becomes a lot easier to build common ground and to have them on your side trying to figure out solutions together. And that tends to be a lot more effective than treating them as a wall to break through so that you can get to the other side. A lot of well-meaning people trying to become influential just become wall breakers. And they're occasionally successful, but they tend to leave a lot of angry people in their wake. We can do better.
So thinking about this as somebody who does some training, how do you take advantage of that? I'm just questioning, like, is it like more experiential type training where the like try to get them to experience what it's like so they're not guessing about what will happen if they do XYZ? Is that?
That's a big element of it. And I will say that, especially I talked about Amplify Your Effectiveness and Jerry Weinberg and some of the folks who learned from him, and they're very big on experiential training. They're very big on that style. The trouble with experiential training is that it can be difficult to structure. It makes a lot of people uncomfortable because they just want somebody to do the equivalent of reading a book to them. And it can be difficult to buy and difficult to sell because it's difficult to package. So what I tend to encourage people to do is to combine elements of experiential learning with more traditional teaching. Like teaching isn't a bad thing. It's just that we have a tendency to do way too much teaching and not give people a chance to do enough learning. What I've found is that I have to balance the teaching and making room for learning a lot differently than I did when I started my career. And so there's a lot of opening statements and setting the basic context, and then asking open questions such as, what do you like about what you're doing now? What do you dislike about what you're doing now? We don't necessarily have to throw them into the deep end of the pool and wait until they start drowning before we hand them a life preserver, although there is some of that. But what we can do is try to help them pull the ideas from us instead of pushing the ideas at them. A lot of training is, like I said, the equivalent of reading a book to them, of like guiding them through a curriculum and pushing ideas at them and hoping that a lot of it sticks. That's sort of level zero. Like that, you can make good money doing that, and a lot of people will buy it, and a lot of people will sell it because it's easy to understand. But the next level is trying to create little experiences that allow them to pull advice from you so that they'll get the advice they need when they need it. Instead of you telling them, oh, here are the 5 tricks you need to learn, and then watching them forget 4 of them. Mm-hmm. And then walk away not being able to do it. And then the next level after that is, instead of tricking them into pulling the advice from you that you know they need, really genuinely listening to them and letting them give themselves the advice and nudging them from time to time, which is, again, more of the kind of work that we do in the JBrains Experience. So you don't have to throw all your teaching away, but maybe instead of explaining too much to them in the beginning, help set the context for the kinds of problem that you're trying to solve, give them an opening statement or two about the idea that you have, and then saying, hey, let's try it. So one of the things that I have in my list to do, I was hoping to do it this year, but it might have to wait until next year. I'm known for the world's best introduction to test-driven development. It's a marketing title. It's intended to be funny. No, I'm not really that arrogant. I was, but I'm not anymore. Let's say I'm recovering in that regard. But one of the things that I'd like to try is the world's gentlest introduction to test-driven development, where we just start and we describe a problem, a little exercise, and I just say, okay, everyone, let's just try writing tests before we write production code and see what happens. When you think you know the production code you want to write, try to write a failing test first, then write the production code. And do that as much as you can. Let's try that for 30 minutes and see what happens. And then literally let every aspect of that, when they complain, when they yawn, when they have a frowny face, when they say, aha, when they celebrate, let's take note of all those things and then discuss what they mean, make sense of them. And in the process of making sense of those things, we'll identify another principle that might help them. Hey, you get into trouble when you write a bunch of tests up front. What if you write one test at a time and make it pass? Oh, but then that gets you into another kind of trouble because now you're building a big ball of mud because you've got all this code that's just bolted on top of each other to make tests pass. Well, what if you, what are some sure signs that you need to make little design changes as you go along? Oh, I know I need to change it here and I don't know what I need to do there. Okay, well, what are some reasons that you tried to change the design? Well, I know that when the names don't make sense to me, I'm designing myself into a corner. Oh, okay, let's, and in that way, what you're doing is you're building up exactly the theory that you could have taught them, exactly the theory that you put into your conference talks, into your blog posts, all that stuff that's been distilled and you want to explain it to them. You're effectively guiding them to rediscovering that stuff for themselves. There's a wonderful article that I read a while ago. I read it every so often called You Could Have Invented Monads and You Probably Did. And what I really like about that, because monads is one of those functional programming topics that's notoriously difficult, and it's a rite of passage that everyone eventually writes a monad tutorial at some point and tries to explain it to other people when you barely understand it. And I'm still at the stage where I don't really quite understand monads yet. But I go back and I read that article every so often. I like how it tries to connect this really difficult to grasp idea to a bunch of simple things that you already understand and lets you connect with what you already know. That's the kind of training that I want to do more of. That's the kind of training that I'm hoping to do more of. And the world's gentlest introduction to test-driven development is just one idea of moving in that direction.
That actually resonates really strongly with me because I remember when I first learned about object-oriented programming, I just learned regular structured programming or whatever you call it first. And I was doing a lot of the object-oriented stuff, but I just didn't have a name or a framework for it. And then once I saw it, I was like, oh, that's just like this other thing that I'm already doing. This is just a different way of doing that same thing that's easier, makes a little bit more sense. And it's like, yes, this is exactly... And it's like I had
a very similar experience when I first started learning test-driven development. And I was, as a professional, I worked in object-oriented languages, at least, C++ and Java. And so ostensibly we were doing object-oriented design. We weren't, but we were trying. And a lot of the things that I learned early on when I practiced test-driven development, the way that it changed my preferences for design kind of went against the grain of what the object-oriented design textbooks suggested. And it was literally 10 years later when I started to learn that I was learning functional programming concepts like immutability, idempotence, composability of small pieces. And then I remember reading for the first time, an object is a collection of partially applied functions. And just going, like I finally oh, that's all an object is. The constructor is how you do partial application, and the methods are partially applied functions that always have access to those arguments. That's exactly how partial application and currying work in Haskell. And suddenly, like, just everything clicked. I heard this big click. And now, like, the first thing I thought of was, oh, that's cool. But the deeper thing that I realized was, we can stop arguing about object-oriented versus functional, because now we found aspects of object-oriented design and functional programming design which are equivalent, like mechanically equivalent. I can literally take any code written in an OO language where there's a class with a constructor and methods, and I can turn it into a family of functions in a functional programming language using partial application, and they're exactly the same design. This is the same words with different alphabet. This is, this is Serbian, this is Croatian. Otherwise, they're the same. What that really means is I can think in OO or I can think in functional terms. And if I need to program in the other language, I can just do the transformation in my head and it's fine. I don't have to worry about the fact that I'm thinking in Java while trying to write in pure script. I don't have to worry about the fact that my colleagues are getting annoyed because I'm writing Haskell in C++. What's important is I can think however I want, however is going to be more comfortable for my brain that day, secure in the knowledge that I can translate to the other paradigm if that's the language we're working in that day. And now I don't have to have any arguments. I don't have to worry about one being better than the other. I don't have to worry about thinking natively in one or the other. I can think in one and translate to the other. And yeah, it's a little bit slower, but I'll get there. And if I do that often enough, then eventually I will be thinking natively in the other terms as well. In fact, I'll be able to think natively in OO and FP, and I'm just a better programmer. I'm just a better designer. And I'm much more relaxed. I'm not worried about doing it wrong. I'm not worried about not being able to do what the cool kids are doing. I'm not worried about not getting it. I get it. I just have to go the slow way today. No big deal. It's a purely mechanical refactoring. I could probably teach the computer to do it. It's not a big deal. And I want that to be about freedom. I want that to be about people not worried about being less, not worried about falling behind, not worried about not measuring up to other people. I want them to free themselves from this imposter syndrome, lack of confidence feeling. We're like, okay, yeah, I have to go the long way today, but at least I can get there. Whether that's the equivalence between OO and FP, or I have to write the tests first and refactor for the beautiful visitor pattern to pop out of this design. I didn't happen to see visitor at the beginning. Doesn't matter. I'm going to get there in 14 tests anyway. That's, again, what part of what's really powerful about these techniques is not just that they are good discipline, good habits. I make fewer mistakes. Mistakes cost less. It's not even just about feeling bold and aggressive and confident. It's about feeling patient, about having patience for myself, about being able to just knowing that I'm going to get there. And today the shortcuts aren't working because I didn't have good enough coffee, or I didn't sleep enough last night, or I had a fight with my spouse, or whatever it is. Brain's not braining well enough today. Cool. I can still go the long way and get there. That's a different kind of confidence. That's a kind of confidence that really makes the job of programming a hell of a lot more satisfying and a hell of a lot less stressful.
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest technique that's given me confidence lately has been getting really good at refactoring. And just knowing that I can take any code no matter where it is and I can change it into what I want. And it really, in my mind, it relieves a lot of the pressure of the old big design up front and the,
Yep.
oh, we might need this feature later. Like I'm much more comfortable leaving stuff in a state that's not perfect, knowing that when it comes time to change it, I can change it in whichever, because like maybe
Yes.
it's in a state and I know that's not its final state. It's there. Maybe it's a little ugly the way it is. There's some square corners that could be rounded, but I'm like, that's okay because once I know which direction to go, it'll be very easy to change it.
Yes. Refactoring isn't just about making the design better. It's not just about reducing volatility and the marginal cost of features. It's also
Optionality is what I was going to
well,
say.
and it's not is yeah, but it's a very particular kind of optionality. It's not merely having options to go this way or that. It's having the option to not be perfect. It's having the option to do 82% of the job now because I trust myself to do the other 18% when I really need it. So many people in this business become perfectionists as a self-defense mechanism because the people around them are lazy or incompetent, whatever. They don't trust them or they don't trust themselves. Tomorrow will never come. If we don't do it now, it'll never get done. That's just another prison to live in. What if instead you trusted yourself to actually do the refactoring when it became obvious that it became needed? And that you would be able to do the refactoring with very little ceremony, that you're not going to leave a huge mess, but you will leave little messes everywhere and you'll clean them up when you actually need that part of the room. That's not just about being tidy. That's about figuring out how tidy you need to be and being okay with being just tidy enough so that you're not wasting time cleaning parts of the house that don't need to be cleaned, cleaning parts of the house that the visitors are not going to go in, cleaning parts of the house that you don't need to work in. That doesn't mean letting them rot. That means not panicking over every little mess, but instead feeling the confidence. I can let things get a little messy because I will clean it up when we get there. And now it's not that far to go from I to we. We can let it be a little messy here because we are confident that we will clean it up when we need to. That is a magical place to live.
I feel like that also then gives you lots of room to prioritize too. To
Well,
make sure that
it's a
where you're
lot.
cleaning up is like the most important thing to do right now.
What goes
Versus
away
others.
is the we have to do everything all the time assumption. Part of the reason that people can't choose priorities is because they're afraid that if they don't do all of it, they won't do any of it. When you immerse yourselves in these techniques to the point where you feel confident that you know how to do it and you have developed the judgment to do just enough of it, what that really means is now I can I can be imperfect and it will be okay, and that gives me more options. When I try to do a bit of something, I don't have to commit to doing all of it. I now have more options. I can change direction more freely. I can pause and come back to it later, secure in the knowledge that I will remember what I need to do, that I will actually get back to it, and that I will actually be able to do it. And those are all things that make priority, ironically, they make priority decisions easier, but they also make priority decisions less necessary. Because if I can move around from thing to thing, I don't have to worry about prioritizing. I can literally sit down twice a day and figure out what the next priority is and just do it, confident in the fact that if I make a mistake, the worst thing that happens is I waste an hour or two, not a week, not a month, not a year. And that I will pay attention when I'm on the wrong track. I will notice it. I'm not knee deep in pain and suffering all the time that causes me to be blind to what's going on. And so I don't have to plan as much up front because I'm so good at planning. I can do it 5 times a day and it's not a waste of effort. It's not a waste of time. I can adjust. I can just flow with the river. And that's a really powerful position to be in. both in terms of how good it is for profit and in, again, how good it is for managing our own energy.
So I have a question that popped in my head. So I gave a talk recently on I called it tech skills for agile development, about all the different technical skills that you need in order to make it all work.
Yeah.
And part of when I start out, I said, hey, look, this is a system and all these tools work together and they all kind of feed off each other.
Hmm.
But the tricky part is, I think, people get overwhelmed
Yes, they do.
because there's a lot of different moving parts. And then like if you just add like if you take away one part from the whole, you're not going to get the full results. You'll still get
Hmm.
results. It'll still be good, better than where
Hmm.
you are, but you're not going to get the full results. So like how do you approach that? Like I guess and maybe we talked about this a little bit earlier with like the getting started and just finding a small spot to get started.
There is some of that. So I'll take extreme programming as a concrete example because that's kind of how we marketed extreme programming 25 years ago. Like, here are 12 practices. They are mutually reinforcing. The sum is greater than, or the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Um, and I think where we really made a mistake is we tried to make it compelling. We tried to convince people to do things by telling them, you really need to do all of it. If you don't do all of it, you won't get nearly the benefit. That was a huge mistake, in my opinion. It seemed like a good idea at the time, but it was a mistake. I think one of the simplest answers to your question is by letting people be suboptimal. Like, we have to, one of the things that makes well-meaning influencers like tech leads or architects or first-line managers, one of the things that makes them stumble is they're under such pressure to deliver results that they feel like whatever they do, they have to do as well as possible. Otherwise, there's no point. It's the falling into the trap of, if we don't solve the whole problem, there's no point in solving any of it. That's nonsense. Like, that's just obviously untrue. It is true that if you do these three things together, you'll get more benefit than you will by doing each of the three, than you will, like, putting the third one in place will unlock something that you won't get from the other two. And it doesn't matter which is the third one to lock into place. There are practices, techniques that interact with each other like that. But I would rather not see that as a reason to force people to do all of them. I would rather see that as a goal to keep in your mind as you strive towards being good at all of them. So, okay, start with, like, which one of those three things should I start with? Well, bottleneck theory says find your bottleneck, understand it really well, pick the trick that's going to alleviate the bottleneck until the bottleneck moves, then start again and just keep going. And what will almost certainly happen is you will accumulate habits. And then when you magically accumulate a cluster of habits that are mutually reinforcing in this way that you're describing, you'll feel that sudden boost. Like, a click will happen. That's sort of a little bit like when you realize that being really good at refactoring doesn't just mean that you can clean up messes easily. It means that you can trust yourself to make messes so you don't have to be like clean room clean all the time. That's one of those click. That's one of those boosts, one of those things that you don't understand until it starts to happen. That's where the magic really happens. If you told me that that was what I had to strive for, I'll bet you I would never have got there. But letting that be a pleasant surprise really made it work for me, because then I could focus. I stopped spending every day wondering when I was going to get to the good stuff, because there was good stuff at every step. So, okay, let there be superficial good stuff, and then good stuff at the layer below that, and good stuff at the layer below that, and then the really awesome stuff, which they might never get to. But if they get there, let it be a pleasant surprise. Instead of trying to dangle that as the carrot in front of them that they have to run towards. Because there's a pretty good chance that that carrot is 20 miles away and they can't see it anyway.
It almost feels kind of like I think of it almost as like compound interest. Like the more you
Yeah,
invest, that like it's in
yeah,
little investments over time, and all of a sudden it just
yeah,
kind of like suddenly explodes.
right.
Yeah.
The thing about an exponential curve is you can't tell where you are on it because an exponential curve looks the same everywhere. Like you can't see where you are. Except one morning you wake up and everything is a lot better than it was on Friday. Like over a weekend, things seem to go faster and you don't know how it happened. In the space of a week, you go from good to great and you don't know how it happened. Um, like let that be a pleasant surprise. And one of the ways that you can let that be a pleasant surprise is just to start, like I said, bottleneck theory suggests start with a bottleneck, find a trick that alleviates the bottleneck, and repeat. And as you accumulate these tricks, eventually some of them will be mutually reinforcing, and then you'll level up and it'll be a pleasant surprise. Everyone will go, woo, and just let it happen. Let it be that way. Like you know that it's going to happen because you've been there, or you have a pretty strong suspicion it's going to happen because you read it in a book and you trust the book, you know the authors, you think they're pretty smart. Okay, cool. Just start from wherever they are. Listen to what they complain about and offer them something to help them with that thing. And if they don't like your suggestion, okay. Even before you get there, one of the tricks that I use that is slow, but it works, when it works forever, is if they keep resisting your solution, then make them aware of the pattern of their complaints. Make them aware of the pattern of their pain. You have to learn how to do it in a non-blaming way. Go read Trisha and Diana's book 3 more times so that you can figure out how to do this in a way that isn't blaming. Say, have you noticed that the thing that you complained about the most in the design is that unnecessary side effects are getting in the way of understanding what the code does? Forget about even writing tests. Like you're having trouble reasoning about what the code does because of these side effects. Like what if we got the side effects out of the way? That is probably a more compelling way to teach immutability and referential transparency than to hit them over the head with a functional programming textbook, even if it's structured interpretation of computer programming, which might be the very best textbook to beat them over the head with in the history of computer science. But if you try to shove that theory in their head before they're ready, they're not going to listen. They can't. They're not even refusing. They're incapable. So, but if you can put it in the context of, oh, this side effect, you keep whining about these side effects getting in the way of understanding how the code works. How do we get rid of the side effects? Okay, let's talk about that together. And pretty soon you're talking about chapter 4 of a functional programming textbook. You've got your way in.
Talking about being self-referential, I feel like we're going in a circle in the sense that, one of the biggest problems I see programmers make is they take too big of steps. I think trainers do that too, and teachers and coaches.
Mm-hmm.
They try to teach them everything else.
Yes.
I remember I used to do judo, and I was sitting there, and this new kid came in, and the instructor's like teaching him, and I'm watching the kid, and I'm like pointing out 100 things this kid's doing wrong, and I want to shout them all out. And the instructor just picked one thing and hammered that one thing for like 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And it was just like, that's probably the better way to do it, is to pick that one thing.
Yeah.
And take baby steps. Yeah.
And let's be clear. Let's be compassionate for the trainers out there and in here. Like, even at the best of times, it's a mistake of enthusiasm. It's a mistake of joy. It's a mistake of love. Like, I have all these great ideas and you need to know about them now. And I'm so excited and I'm going to tell you all of them now. I've done it a bunch in this conversation. Like, it's very easy to fall into that trap. Okay. One advantage we have in a podcast is that's actually pretty good for a podcast. Like, it's good for a conference talk. Like, it's good for a half-day conference tutorial or workshop. But it's really bad for learning. Like, it doesn't work. You try to push, and I know that it's bad for learning because I resist it when people do it to me. I'm like, you can't stop pushing. I don't, too many things at once. I don't understand. The difference is I know how to put into words that feeling so that I can tell people, stop doing it to me. Now, it annoys them and it sometimes makes them feel bad, It makes them feel bad because it makes them feel like I'm not paying attention to them, or it makes them feel bad because now they feel like they made a mistake. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to tell you, look, it's not getting through. You need to pause one thing at a time. And when I am desperately asking people what to give me one thing at a time, I'm constantly reminding myself the next time I'm in a teaching situation, the next time I'm in a learning situation, one thing at a time. And so when I'm a professional 5-pin bowler, I coach kids. I was just at a tournament 6 weeks ago with kids, national level tournament. That is not the time to try to shove a bunch of things in their head. That is the time to pick the one thing that we think is going to help them succeed the most this week and gently remind them of it, like water drops on rock. And if you just keep doing it and doing it and doing it, you will wear down the rock a tiny bit, but maybe that's all it takes. And it sounds like that's exactly what your instructor did. They understood that wisdom and said, we're just going to do this one thing. And here's the important thing. I'm going to let them do the other 99 things wrong, and it's fine. Because they're not doing them wrong. They're just not ready to do them right yet.
Yeah, well, that also reminds me, I take piano lessons and I've been playing the same song for probably 6 or 8 months now, which is just
Yep.
crazy. But like every time the teacher's like, okay, focus on this one thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's definitely.
There's a
I
whole bunch of technique that you're learning that you probably won't realize you picked up until you then try to play something else and the passage feels easier than you expected. And you're like, oh, I learned it by practicing something similar in that piece. And yeah, that's part of what we're hoping will happen, is that by focusing your attention on this one thing, when you go to do something similar but different, it'll feel easier than you expected. And you'll get that warm, tingly feeling that makes you want to keep going. As opposed to standing in front of the room on day one, telling you the 87 things you're doing wrong so that you feel terrible about yourself
Yeah,
and everyone around you and give up.
yeah.
That
Well,
helps no one.
that's always hard. And I had this experience recently, I'm sure you've had it too, where somebody's excited to show you their code and you look at it and you're immediately like alarm bells are going off and you're like, ah, you're like, I'm instantly like searching for what's something good that they did that I could be like, okay, yeah, you're doing this and this is good.
Yeah.
This over, and then like, what's the major problem? So I can be like, okay, this one, if you had to change one thing, focus on this. And it can be
I have found
challenging.
it really helpful in that situation to say, I'm struggling to understand, or just
Yeah,
tell
well,
me more about, because it focuses on my deficit, not theirs.
yep. And also like that, okay, I'm looking at this. The other question is like, well, what is the problem that you're solving? Like, what is most important in their
Yeah.
mind in terms of the problem that they're seeing? And then me
Yeah.
in my back of my head trying to connect that to,
Yeah.
okay, they're seeing this problem. What in this code could cause that problem? Oh, they've got these weird race conditions. Okay, well, maybe it's because they have global variables everywhere. Let's look at
Right.
that and let's see if we can address some of that first.
I know
Before we
that
address the
these
other
tends
100
of these
problems.
these things tend to cause those kinds of problems. Is there any chance that's happening here?
Yeah,
Like
that's
again, these
also a
are
good question too.
yeah,
Yeah. Like you're
yeah.
looking at, you're like, I bet you have problems with this. And they're like, how did you know? And I'm like, well, this thing here tends to cause that problem. And that establishes you as the expert and gains some trust.
Well, so now it really depends on what context you're in. If you're in a context where gaining that kind of trust through showing expertise is helpful, that's a great way to do it. And I do the same thing, right? Let me guess, you're struggling with this. Let me guess, you have a lot of those. I'm going to make a wild guess. Like this is what I'm in an environment where I think that I'm going to gain trust by establishing credibility. That's what I'll do. But once I have it, I really strongly prefer to take the more open approach where I say, I don't know about you, but I tend to see this symptom when that problem's around. Is there any chance that's happening here? Does that sound familiar? Or um, when you've had this problem in the past, or when you've had this symptom in the past, what kinds of problems did you find at the bottom of it? And give them a chance to list two or three and then say, oh, that second one sounds like that might be a problem. Or that first one looks like these 5 lines of code right here. That where we can, I'm guiding them to make sense of what's going on in their head and to articulate it for me, to slow down enough to articulate it to me so that I can understand. And that tends to work a lot better than, pointing and grunting and saying, I don't get it. What the hell is this? What the hell is
Yeah.
that? Which is often what I want to do.
Yeah. Well, also you're helping them draw those connections, so it's more of like on that pushing towards that like coaching side of teaching them and building them up, as
Right.
opposed
We
to
want,
the one pointing
yeah,
it out. Yeah.
that is a very servant leadershipy kind of thing, right? Servant leadership is not about buying donuts. It's about prioritizing their growth over pounding your own chest, over asserting your own dominance and showing your expertise. It came up for me several years ago that I'm just kind of I'm bored with how good I am at this. Like I know that sounds like that could sound like a terrible thing to say outside of this context, but like I'm so over how good I am at this. I really am. And I mean that not in the like humble brag way. I genuinely don't care anymore. Like the fact that I'm really good at some of these things is not interesting to me anymore. What I want is to be able to unlock this power in other people. Not necessarily by learning the things that I learned, but by understanding more deeply how what I'm good at makes my life better and helping other people find that for themselves. And some of that will be you should learn test driven development. You should practice refactoring. You should learn how to slice stories. I can teach you that stuff too. But some of it will be in stuff that I am never going to be any good at. But what matters to me is helping them understand how do they learn? Uh, what causes them to be determined to stick with something and what causes them to give up? That's related to the motivation question you asked earlier. What kinds of explanations help them understand as opposed to not help them understand? What kinds of experiments can they run that helps them build confidence as opposed to not build confidence? What kinds of mistakes are they afraid of as opposed to not afraid of? All these go into, they're a little bit in the line of that thinking partnership, where I'm not trying to teach them anything. I'm not even trying to trick them into pulling the right advice from me. I'm not even tricking them into thinking it was their idea. I'm all the way at genuinely helping them make sense of what's going on in their own head so that they can identify the solutions they already have to their own problems. Because in a lot of cases, the reason why people struggle with the questions that we've talked about has to do with simply not being able to see what's right in front of them, not being able to see what's just below the surface in their head, not having the confidence to marshal the resources they already have, not believing enough in what they already understand, that if I can help them connect with those things, they'll solve their own problems. And maybe they'll ask me for a little bit of advice and I'll get to feel smart. But we'll be able to get the best of both of those things. And they'll walk away genuinely better equipped to face whatever challenge is next for them, rather than, having a slightly better habit or being able to master a technique that they're not going to use in their day job, or being 3 chapters farther ahead in a textbook that will, the benefits of which will ultimately remain out of reach. Like I want to help them with the kinds of problems that they're dealing with now and help them genuinely figure out how to solve their own problem. Where what they need me for is a guide to help them make sense of what's going on in their own head until they learn how to do that for themselves too. And the good thing about that kind of skill is it's a little bit like therapy. Therapists need therapists. Not because they don't know how to do, but because it's very hard to be the therapist and the patient at the same time. They're two very different ways of thinking about yourself. And if you want to get the most out of therapy, you can't be the therapist. If you want to get the most out of coaching, you can't be the coach. So the cool thing about that is that people are going to need me and I'm going to need them. I can teach them everything I know about coaching, and they're still going to need a coach, and they'll probably come to me, just like I'll probably go to them. Everybody wins.
Yeah, I think that's been one of my biggest growth areas recently has and partially from talking to you and Trisha and Yvette and a bunch of others, and it's that idea of letting go of what I think is the best answer for somebody and trying to help them discover for themselves whatever might be. And maybe it's what I had in mind, and maybe it's something even better. And
Yeah.
often it's something even better that I hadn't even thought of. And so that's been very freeing.
Yeah, I've noticed kind of a little set of stages that people go through. Because I remember 15 years ago, I was with a client and somebody at a meeting said, you ask really good questions. I want to learn how to ask questions. And I was surprised by that. No one had ever said that to me before. I didn't actually think I was good at asking questions, and apparently I was. But I started to think about, like, how do I do this? And I think a lot of people go through these stages. In the beginning, they give advice. Like, I know things, you need to know these things. I'm going to tell you these things, and then you'll know these things. That's not bad, but it's often not effective. So then you ask leading questions. And the objective is to lead somebody to ask the question that then prompts you to give the advice that you thought you had to give them. So it's a little bit better than just giving them the advice. But it starts to get into like benevolent manipulation territory, and some people are very uncomfortable with that. One of the things that I try to do is to help people feel comfortable with that, not because benevolent manipulation is good. I mean, in principle, it's good because it's benevolent, but like it's just a step along the path. Gradually, you start to ask them more open questions, but where you make strong assumptions about the answers they're going to give. Like you ask them questions hoping that they're going to answer a particular way so that you can then give them the advice. Or from time to time, you'll ask them the question, they'll answer the way you expected, and then they'll realize the thing for themselves that you were going to tell them. This is what Jerry Weinberg wrote about in Secrets of Consulting, right? You want them to think that the idea came from them, even though it
Yeah.
was the idea that you intended to give them the whole
It's
way.
like you can lead a buffalo anywhere you want as long as
Right,
it's
as
where
long
they
as
want
they
to
wanted
go.
to go there, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of that. But then there's one stage beyond that, which is where you're asking genuinely open questions with pure curiosity, where you don't, maybe you have an idea how they might answer, but you're utterly prepared for any answer that might come. And you don't consider it a failure when they are on the wrong track. There is no the wrong track, there's only their track. And they answer in a way that you totally were not prepared for. But what you are prepared to do is to go with it and to figure out together what it means. So you go from giving advice to asking leading questions to asking like open questions with an expectation of the answer to asking genuinely open questions with total curiosity, with like what the Buddhists call curiosity. I have no idea what's going to come next, and I want to find out. And I don't want to say that one of those is better than the other. I will say that in many cases, going deeper into those stages tends to be more effective, harmonious practice. That doesn't mean that asking leading questions is bad. It just means don't stop there. That doesn't mean that giving advice is bad. It means don't stop there. And I think these are four stages that people generally go through when they decide that what they want to do in life is to help others. And when you see someone trying to push advice into someone else's head and you want to grab them and shake them by the shoulders and say, stop it, remember that that used to be you. In fact, that used to be you on both sides of that equation. So, okay. Oh, they're in stage one. I remember stage one, where you get to feel like you're the expert all the time. It's marvelous. The problem is most people won't listen to you most of the time. So, okay, hey, I saw what happened over there. I see you're shaking your head. Did they like not believe you or something? Yeah, they're not ready to listen to me, man. I'm so sick of all these people who aren't ready to listen to me. Well, do you know why they're not really ready to listen to you? Because I think I have some ideas about that. And then you can start up a conversation and try to nudge them in the direction of starting to ask leading questions. Not that leading questions are so great, but if they try to go to like genuine curiosity from day one, you're going to lose them. They're not ready for that. There's a very good chance, though, that you can teach them, guide them to start asking leading questions. it's more effective when they think it was their idea. One of the ways that you can trick them into coming up with your idea is to ask them questions that you know are designed to lead in the direction of your idea. Now, the trick is to learn how to ask these questions and make them feel like questions. That takes practice. Let's try that for a while. And then when they're comfortable asking leading questions, you can go one step farther and one step farther. And that's not only a way that you can help other people practice more ethical influence, but that's also a way that you can check yourself. I'm acting very stage 1 right now. Maybe I should ask a question. I'm acting very stage 2 right now. Maybe I should let go of my expectation about where their problem is. I keep asking them really good leading questions and they're not following me. Damn it. What's going on? Oh, maybe the problem isn't what I think it is. I think it's time to jump into some curiosity and to really ask open questions about what the problem might be. What are some of those questions? Hey, what do you like about what you're doing? I know we've talked a lot about how it's a bad idea, but what do you like about what you're doing right now? Because that's a question they're not going to expect. And then you'll find out the 4 good reasons why they cling to this thing that you know is a bad idea. And now the conversation can go in an interesting direction. Like you might have a couple of ideas about what is common, but a lot of the times when you ask people, okay, this thing that you don't want to do anymore, there must be something about it you like. What do you like about what you're doing? Like that tends to send the discussion in a whole different direction and a much more interesting and effective one. And that is the kind of question that you can feel comfortable asking when you're there with genuine, total curiosity, where you're not trying to push them in a particular direction. You don't have a particular bit of advice in mind, when you're ready to be completely wrong about what's happening. And that's okay.
Yeah. No, that's good. It's a little heavy, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, we get into heavy stuff. That's eventually I don't want to just live at the level of concrete tricks. I mean, eventually we need to talk about why this stuff works so that people understand how to do it themselves instead of just trying to follow somebody else's rules. There's way too much of trying to get people to follow each other's rules out there. It doesn't work as well as we'd like it to. But if they understand what's going on 2 or 3 levels below, they can come up with rules that work better for them, that achieve what they want to achieve, and that feel like something they'll actually do instead of something they'll do only when other people are looking. Those are the things they'll do even when nobody's watching, when it's their rules.
Yeah. So if people want to learn more, they can go to jbrains.ca. I see it's on your shirt right there.
Yes, absolutely. So head to jbrains.ca. If you'd like to ask a question, go to ask.jbrains.ca. And please don't ask me to do your homework. And I'm not an LLM. I'm a real person. So don't put programming exercises in there. But you can ask any question you like, as long as you're willing to wait forever for the answer. If you're willing to wait forever for the answer, that service is free. And if you need a better service level agreement, we can talk about how much that costs. The JBrains Experience is affordable for individuals if you need answers sooner. And if your company needs answers right now, we can talk about how much that costs. It's probably not as much as you think. But I'm happy to answer anyone's questions as long as I get to decide when I get the answer.
Yeah, I've kind of stolen that a little bit in that people are always like, "Oh, can I send you questions?" Like, well, you can always send the question. I was like,
Yep.
if it's an easy answer, I'm happy to do it. If not,
Yep.
maybe we'll have to talk about getting paid. But yeah,
Oh, we got to let people in on something, man. When you ask us questions, we crystallize our thoughts in a way that we haven't been able to do. And then we write 2 articles or a chapter of a book, or we have a great idea for a thing we need to say in a meeting with a client the next day. Like, you're helping us do our marketing. I can't guarantee how soon I'm going to answer you, but I promise you, every question you ask is one more trick in my book, one more step towards doing better marketing, better advertising. It's, consultants feed on your questions. So feed your local consultant, ask them a question.
all right. Well, thank you very much. It's been a great conversation, and yeah, I feel sorry for Taylor having to do the editing, but I do have one fan, Norm, who always asks for longer episodes. So this one's for you, Norm.
I told you when we started that longer was not going to be a problem.
Yeah, no, it definitely. And I had three things on my list at the beginning, and one of them we didn't even get to. But when you start talking about like pairing things out, I was like, okay, that's getting paired. So
Well, excellent. Then we have something to do next time.
perfect. Thank you. All right.
All right. Thank you.
That's it for today's episode of the LabVIEW Experiment. Thanks for listening. If you have any comments or questions, head over to thelabviewexperiment.com and drop me a note. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at the LV Experiment.